Welcome to Woodbury Writes Podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Carlson, and today I have the honor of being with Sarita Valentine, a Woodbury resident and a local author who has published The G Girls, A Frenemy Whodunit. Welcome, Sarita.
I feel very lucky that and blessed that you came along and wanted to do this and met Peter. And
yeah, who knew? Who knew when we were looking at his art in the library that things would unfold the way they did? It's a very cool thing about the library. Things happen once they start there, you know?
Very, very cool. I'm not a good at self-promoting, obviously, so I have to learn.
Well, you know what? It's not easy because, and I find people that like to make their art. This marketing thing that becomes a part of the package if you want to engage an audience is exhausting, and it takes us out of where we want to be, you know, which is making stuff, you know. So from my point of view, I just try to have some fun with it, you know.
That would be the way to go.
And yeah, and never give up my day job, you know, because, you know, unless you're Emily Dickinson or Robert Frost or Billy Collins, forget it. Just share your art with the people around you and hope for the best, you know?
I taught piano and voice for 25 years. And at the end of 25 years, I said to myself, hey, I'm a terrible business person. Like, it took that long for me to figure out that I was a good voice teacher, good piano teacher in some ways, much better at the voice, which is my main instrument. But it took me 25 years to figure out I wasn't good at the business. For me, because I was a piano and voice teacher, and I actually trained in preschool music. And this speaks to the G Girls in some ways, but I had to adjust with having a student through all the stages of their development. You see what a 2-year-old does and what a 3-year-old does and what a 4-year-old does and how much cognition a 4-year-old has versus a 3-year-old. You know, now I work a lot with 5-year-old in the elementary school I'm in, and very rarely would I start a 5-year-old in an instrument, but sometimes I have a student who goes from the age of, say, 8 or 9 all the way to 18. And every year when you came back, you know, I would always think, oh, I know the kid that is going to be in front of me. And no, that year, everything changed. And I don't know that kid anymore. And now I have to refamiliarize myself with their likes, their interests, you know, their personalities, they're experiencing, you know. I had a parent who was also a friend of mine who always used to say, oh, they're feeling their oats. You know, every time that kid went through a stage of trying to assert themselves, experiment with their own will and their own self-direction, sometimes that was really in your face, and they would be feeling their oats. So the G Girls, the year I started it, 3 things happened. First, I was exploring literature to purchase for my nephews. You know, I couldn't just read a review. I had to read the book because I know their tastes, I know their interests, and I knew what they wouldn't read. I guess I was very struck by the quality of the writing, and I knew these were popular authors. You know what I mean? The writing is at a certain level, and I thought, I could do that. Number one. Number two, I had 2 students. They were 13, 14 years old. One got in a fight at a school, which you're introduced to that in the first chapter, is actually a true thing that happened to a student of mine. And she was very slender and petite, like just a little wisp of a thing. And some big girl bumped into her in the hall and got mad at her and punched her, and they got in a fight. And she came up swinging, and she got suspended. But she laughed about it. She was suspended for 2 weeks or something. It was, I think the result would have been worse today than it was back then. So all of that, which is a kind of a subplot in the book, was actually a true thing that happened to a student. And then the other student, I thought she did the most interesting thing, because she was 13, and that year she's just come in and talk. And she was kind of a quiet, she loved literature, she read all the time, but that year she decided she was going to come out of her shell, and she decided she was just going to insert herself into the cool kids group, cool kids. So she just went and started sitting with them. Like, she just showed up where they were. And I just thought it was like crazy brave of her. But they would be a little bit snarky in a very subtle way with her. And she wasn't deciphering that very well and how to deal with it. I mean, it wasn't deterring her, but she was just trying to make sense of it. So that combination of things, I was also very bored, which is why I started writing. I was kind of always needed a creative outlet, and I was staying with my mom, and there wasn't much I could do creatively while I was with her. So I just started writing to alleviate my boredom. I also, growing up, had a very hard time naming emotions in high school. And I think this has changed for kids now. They get a lot of emotional training, a lot more than I got growing up in the early 60s and early 70s. And and in a family that was not particularly emotional. So I wanted to have a lot of language for emotion in the book. And actually what I found has changed that, I think, for kids, weirdly, is reality TV shows.
So I have a question for you, Sarita. The plot that you've mentioned J.K. Rowling and fantasy, and the plot you construct in your Frenemy Whodunit is a very familiar one for middle-class American kids, right? We can identify with the house where the neighborhood kids or the gang hangs out, plays pool or does whatever. And you've created very identifiable characters, and they're not just types, although we can identify types of people in them. They have personalities, interests, and drive. And when you were out at your mom's and you decided you'd do some writing to alleviate the boredom and exercise your creativity, what brought you to that plot for your nephews?
Well, at that point, I was more concerned from girls. It really wasn't I wasn't thinking about my nephews. I think, just to back up a tad, and before I answer your question, I want to say, and this is for other writers, that, I mean, most artists, I think, are perfectionists. But I let myself off the hook right away on that particular issue. And ultimately, I was a perfectionist about the book, and I kept at it until it was perfect for me, for my standard, as perfect as I thought I was going to be able to make it. But initially I was like, I don't have to be perfect here. And I think that need to be perfect can be such a big deterrent for people launching into the arts, because nobody starts off perfect in any art. And you always have to remember that. And as a voice teacher, it's particularly a big issue, because we have this idea that you're either born singing, or you can either sing or you can't. No development, is possible there. It's totally not true. So anyway, and now I forgot your question. So what did, or could you read?
Yeah, you have identifiable characters in an identifiable world. And you, speaking of language and the language for emotions, you capture the language, the slang of kids today. And I'm just wondering what creative muse brought you to that environment versus fantasy or adventure, or even a different different genre? What brought you into the whodunit in a
Okay,
contemporary setting with young kids?
so I like whodunits. I like mysteries, first of all. And so I wanted to make it a mystery just for that reason. Because I feel like it makes for compelling reading, keeps people interested. And as far as so in a lot of literature, especially at the time had started it, 2006, was fantasy based, and I think for teens it's probably still somewhat the same, although there's been changes. There was a lot of fantasy based literature, a lot of dystopian literature, science fiction, and I feel like there's a lot of readers who just don't identify with those types of genres. Who girls are interested in trying to navigate social situations. That's what that stage of life is all about. Trying to figure out where you are in society, who you are in society, and trying to make sense of relationships in a whole other way. And I didn't see personally a lot of literature addressing that, or if you do see it, it's very cliche. It's always that the popular kids don't like the oddball, and then the oddball finds himself or herself and is fine or whatever. And it just, those cliche plot lines we see in movies and TV shows, hear about in songs. Remember, I don't know if that song "The Cool Kids" came out around that time, and I just got sick of it. And I wanted to write a book that with relatable characters who were multidimensional, even though they were they were playing the games, but they were real people playing the games with the real motivations and issues. And also, because I work with a lot of teens and boys and girls, I knew the way into communicating with them, because you have to totally respect teenagers as a whole person if you're going to get them to communicate with you. You have to see their validity. And I feel like I brought that to my characters in writing them, where I do, even the one, even the dark character, even the one you don't like, I end up liking her in her own way, or having compassion for her at any rate, because partly because her friends liked her, and because her friends liked her and gave her validity, even though she, was a piece of work.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And when you say that they are multi-dimensional characters, I think the fact that even the rascal, the girl who does this thing that seems to push her beyond the pale in terms of, can I like this character? That she has value to them in some form or fashion. And it gets too easy, I think, to just write people off. Okay, I'm done. And not see ways around that. And I think, without giving your book away, I think as an adult, as a high school English teacher reading this book, I was delighted to see how elegantly the main character navigates relationships and comes into her own in the face of some very painful experiences, and brutally painful experiences that she goes through in the course of this novel. I'm just wondering, do the young people that you know, did they help provide the slang that you use so effectively to create your characters?
It's a huge challenge to do the slang. It was the thing that took the longest. I agonized for days, weeks, months on it. And I consulted different writers, different other people. I even talk with my nephews who, because it started so long ago, they became young adults by the time I had it finished. The problem becomes slang changes really quickly. And by the time you're using it, you're pretty much dating your work. The second problem with it is it's regional. So you might have California slang, and some of it is like stratified in society. Different slang reflects different social classes.
Mhm.
I'm trying to write a book that's going to appeal to the broadest possible number of people. And I know teenage girls, and they see one thing they don't like she used this word or that word, and that means this girl is this or that girl is that. And now the character becomes unrelatable. My nephews have said, try to make up your own slang, which I actually did. A lot of it is good enough not to be recognized as something I made up. And I also spent a lot of time Googling slang and used some of that. So I researched the slang. I had a few teenage ex-students or current students who I consulted on it and asked if I was using this or that correctly. So what I ended up trying to do was put just enough in there to make it sound real, but as minimally as possible, because the way teens actually talk to each other, I could never mimic. It's almost like a separate language a lot of the time. And I would never have gotten that right. So I didn't try to do that.
It's amazing. It flows so well. I mean, I think I told you when I started it, I didn't put it down till I stopped. I was just so compelled. Like, what are these characters going to do next? How are they going to solve these problems? And the whodunit's a real thing. You know, you really are wondering who could be behind some of these things that are wrecking this young girl's circumstances at school. So are there any authors that are kind of like your mentor authors that you think about in terms of how you structured the plot or the characters' actions?
Well, I will back up and say I like to write research papers, and my BA and MA are in musicology, which is a degree that features writing. That's where all my writing experience came from. So there's a lot of when you write a research paper, logic is really important in the structure. So I feel like I really was able to bring that to the book. And in terms of mentoring writers, I would say that, I do like a minimalist writer like Hemingway. But I love the movie Clueless. I love Jane Austen, Emma. So I think actually I made some notes on that. I got to remember what they are. Edith Wharton is I love Edith Wharton. House of Mirth is one of my favorite books. And the main character is not really far from a woman in kind of a social dilemma, same sort of context, reality based. So maybe not so much in terms of the actual style of writing, but in terms of the content. And Edith Wharton she's pretty minimalist in some ways in her writing. There's not a lot extra there.
Wharton's an interesting one. I'm just thinking about like Ethan Frome, the one we've all had to read at some point or another, which is just a great story about the personal dynamics of a household and the subtle navigation. And then, well, I think there's some humor running through there, through the imagery, but I also think that like your book, it opens up really important questions. Well, what could Ethan do, or what options does he really have given his social circumstances? And is Xena so evil, or is she trapped too? And it gets at those questions that really are about finding our place in the world and understanding how we fit in or don't fit in or shouldn't fit in, and a different time and a different age level maybe, but I think getting at those same dynamics. So it's interesting you mentioned Wharton. Yeah, for sure.
In making me think of this other point with this is that in House of Mirth and Ethan Frome, the main character, they weren't able to change. That's the tragedy. Neither character could make the changes that they needed to make. But I wanted two things. One, to write a book with a strong female character at the age of a teenager. I wanted to demonstrate what a strong female character looks like, because I don't think, we have a lot of literature that shows the dark side of things, but I'm always interested in a TV series or a book where the characters grow and change from one person into another. When I was growing up, I felt very trapped, very, very trapped in high school. I brought that into the book, I think, in a big way, especially like the laying in the nurse's office is one of my favorite scenes in my own book, because there's that whole thing like, where do I go? Well, you go to the nurse's office, and that starts right from kindergarten. Kids learn, like, I can go to the nurse's office, but you're still very, very trapped. There's no escaping that environment. And I experienced that an awful lot and didn't see a way out. Didn't know how to even make a decision on how to, other than withdrawing as the decision, and Dar, my main character, she doesn't withdraw, and that takes superhuman strength, really. And I'm not saying every girl can do that, but it's an option. You just have to face the consequences.
It is, and she does. I'm not going to give it away, but having a character like that and getting a sense of what's possible when you choose to behave and make the choices that she chose to make, very compelling. So, would you be willing to read from the book just to give us a sense of the narrative?
Sure. Did you have any part of it that you thought I should read?
I think maybe at the beginning, where you encourage the reader to stick with it, because that's what the book asks us to do, to stick with those people we're not so sure of, and see things through. And that's what life asks us to do. That's what relationships are about when we value them.
I added that just more recently, this paragraph that I'm about to read, because I was concerned about snap judgments. Because like you mentioned earlier, we make snap judgments on people, and then we don't leave them any room to make a change, to grow or change. And some people don't, but there should always be, especially with young people, there always needs to be room for them to grow into someone else. And as a teacher, the kid that's a pain in the what on one year, the following year could be just like a little saint in your classroom. You just don't know where they're going to go. So pegging kids is a real problem, I think. And so anyway, this has nothing to do with pegging kids, but I will read it. Dear reader, the main characters in the G Girls were invented by me, the author. You may like them, you may not. I introduced them to you in the first chapter, and I confess I find them a little icky. So if you don't like them after reading the first chapter, I encourage you to keep reading. You may feel differently about them by the end of the book. And even if you don't, it doesn't matter. I think there is value in their story, whether you like the characters or not. None of us are so perfect that we cannot benefit from another's story, even if it is just to decide that is not who we want to be.
So much wisdom in that paragraph. It's so great. Sarita, what's next for you and the G Girls, right? I mean, it was a long time in the writing It's a beautifully polished piece. What's next?
I really don't know. Is it? I would like to have a way for girls to not just read it, but make use of it, and maybe parents too. A couple of moms have said to me they wish that they could have used this as an opening with their daughters to discuss what's going on in their lives. But it seems to me like if you have a painful experience, which almost everybody does, you need a place to state it. And so I would like to be able to provide some kind of context for that with the G girls. But right now, I guess it's just more a matter of putting it out into, trying to get people to read it as a starting point, giving it to high school English teachers. I've met 2 more since I met you. So that's fortuitous. I hope I'll be at the Woodbury Library in the authors fair when they have that, and maybe some Christmas fairs around Woodbury with my copies. So you could buy them from me and set up a way to contact me, which maybe you could even give me some advice on. And I don't know more than that in terms of where I'm going. I don't have any plans for any more writing, but that may change.
Well, it is a great book available on Amazon.com. So The G Girls, A Friend of Me Who Done It by S.J. Valentine. I hope everybody who hears this podcast goes and gets multiple copies, because once they have one, they're going to want to give them away to everybody they know. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This is very sweet. Thank you so much for your support in this journey to being a writer.